Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the Holocaust Center's Director of Education. I want to give a huge thank you to Verizon for sponsoring this series entitled Embracing Our Humanity and Diversity. Today's program is the first of 4. We are grateful for Verizon's support, and we welcome all of the Verizon employees who are joining us today. Thanks to our community partners, the Anti-Defamation League of the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle Asian Art Museum, and the Wing Luke Museum. Thank you also to our 2021 series sponsor, the Tacoma Jewish Community Fund. The Holocaust Center for Humanity in downtown Seattle sits on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. The Holocaust Center's museum is open on Sundays, and you can reserve your tickets now to explore the exhibit, Finding Light in the Darkness, which highlights the stories of local Holocaust survivors, showcasing artifacts and video testimony. Please consider becoming a member of the Holocaust Center for Humanity. By becoming a member, you help the Holocaust Center to teach the lessons of the Holocaust, inspiring students of all ages to confront bigotry and intolerance. Members receive free, unlimited admission for the year, and members also receive the satisfaction of helping to sustain the important work of the Holocaust Center. Your membership is fully tax deductible, and memberships start at just $36 a year. I'm putting a link in the chat where you can learn more, and you can even become a member today. Thank you to everyone who is already a member. When you visit the Holocaust Center's museum, one of the survivors whose story is highlighted is that of Henry Friedman. As a Jewish 14-year-old in Nazi-occupied Eastern Poland, Henry's family experienced increasing threats and persecution, both from the government and the local community. One day in February 1942, a young Christian lady working in a police station overheard a conversation between the Gestapo and the Ukraine police that they were going to pick up Henry's father. Henry says, quote, "She ran through deep snow to warn my father to run for his life. And because of this young Christian girl, I am alive today." This young woman, Julia Simchuk, was one of less than 1% of people who helped Jews. Most people stood by or looked the other way. It would have been impossible to murder 6 million Jewish people if more people had stepped up, spoken out, or helped in whatever ways were available to them. We learned from the Holocaust that small actions have a ripple effect. We all have the power to do something to help. It's an honor to have with us today Hilary Bernstein. The title of her presentation is If Not Now, When? It's a call to action, but also the reminder that we all have a responsibility to others. Hilary Bernstein is a respected education consultant with close to 20 years experience facilitating discussions focused on bias, diversity, and creating positive change. Prior to her consulting role, she was regional director of the Anti-Defamation League in the Pacific Northwest for 15 years, where she addressed anti-Semitism and other forms of prejudice and bigotry throughout a 5-state region. I'm lucky to have known Hilary for almost 20 years and can attest to her deep knowledge and passion for empowering others to have difficult conversations, ask the tough questions, and recognize the difference each one of us can make. Thank you so much, Hilary, for being with us here today.
Thank you, Ilana, so much for that lovely introduction. It's true, we have known each other a long time. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today, and thank you to the Holocaust Center for Humanity for all the work that you do every day, to help us learn lessons from the Holocaust and from history. The information I'm going to be sharing today actually isn't focused on history at all. I'm not going to be sharing historical research. I won't be talking about people or events from the Holocaust, from that terrible time. Instead, the information I'm going to be sharing with you is focused on the here and now. It will be focused on you and me, and thinking about how our actions or our inactions will become part of history. I'll share with you specific ideas that you can take, specific steps that you can take to counter the tendency that we all have to be complicit, to look the other way when we witness bias. And I'll help you think about ways to overcome that very real feeling of, I don't know what to do. You know, the feeling of being like a deer caught in headlights when you overhear something or you witness something that's inappropriate. And so I guess in that way, we absolutely will be embracing one of the most important lessons from the Holocaust, and that is the importance of being an ally. I should add that there's going to be opportunities for you to actively participate during the presentation today. I'm going to be sharing 2 live Zoom polls with you, where you will be able to answer a couple of questions in real time. Your answers will be anonymous, but we will all be able to see the group's responses to the questions that I pose. So I really hope that you will participate. It will add to our discussion. So let me share my screen now. Fingers crossed. You may have noticed the title of this presentation. The first part, if not now, when, is actually part of a longer quote. Some of you may know it. It goes like this: if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm not for others, what am I? And if not now, when? I love this quote because I think the first part is about awareness. You know, if I'm not for myself, who will be? And if I'm not for others, what am I? Is about allyship. And the third part, if not now, when, is about action. So I think of it in terms of 3 A's: awareness, allyship, and action. The fascinating thing is that this quote is attributed to an ancient Jewish sage named Hillel, and he lived 2,000 years ago. So think about that, 2,000 years ago. And yet, I think this quote has absolute relevance for today. That's why I love it. And speaking of today, we are seeing in the news every day demands for social justice reckoning. We're seeing examples of hatred targeting specific groups. We're seeing political divisiveness all around us. On the internet, we see symbols of hate, old symbols that we recognize, new symbols that we may not, but are just as pernicious. And on our devices, across our devices, we see mean-spirited language. And we ask ourselves, you know, what can we do? How can we speak up? It's bombarding us. And when can I be an ally? You know, these questions really matter, and they swirl around for all of us. We wonder, can we be an ally for a colleague? Could we be an ally for a friend? Maybe even a stranger. The thing about being an ally is that we have to learn how to be an ally. We have to think about it, and we have to commit to it. So today's focus is going to be some concepts to consider when trying to counter this feeling of being a bystander, the tendency to be complicit and not do anything. A framework for what allyship can look like. And then also some strategies for promoting conversations about difficult topics. And the reason I want to focus on this also is because allyship really depends upon relationships. with other people. Yes, you could be an ally for a stranger, absolutely. But in other cases, it really matters that we have built relationships with people. And to do that, we have to have conversations with them. And these concepts, this framework, these strategies, they can apply in the workplace. If you're working, they can apply in volunteer situations. Maybe you're on committee where you're interacting with other people. It can apply to your neighbors and to your family. So whatever situations you're in, I believe you'll be able to draw some inspiration and some ideas to use. In the workplace particularly, but also in civic life, we hear a lot these days about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And it's a really important focus of our leaders, whether they are corporate leaders or civic leaders, because they are really interested in helping us develop a mindset about inclusion and belonging, and to think of it as an overarching focus. And this is true in the office, it's true in our communities, in our schools, and it's rightfully so, appropriately important. The thing is that no matter how our leaders are focused on these ideas, implementing diversity, inclusion, and belonging depends on us as individuals. We're the ones that have to implement the ideas of standing up for each other. We have to change our behaviors and the ways that we respond. So it's really important as an overarching mindset, but it's we, the individuals, who are going to need to step up and think about how to implement it. And one way to do that is an idea called zero indifference. Now, many of you have heard the term zero tolerance, especially like in school settings, zero tolerance for drugs or zero tolerance for weapons or things like that. I'm not talking about zero intolerance. Or zero tolerance. I'm talking about zero indifference. And zero indifference is just the idea that no one looks the other way in the face of bias or prejudice. I'll talk a little bit about how to implement this in a while, and it sounds like a very simple idea, but it's powerful. I've seen it change the culture in a workplace. I've seen it change the culture in a school and in some volunteer situations as well. So zero indifference means nobody looks the other way when there's an inappropriate comment or a biased statement that's made or biased behavior. And it's a way that we can know that we can count on others around us, but even more importantly, it's a way that we can hold ourselves accountable, that we're going to uphold this idea of zero indifference. So more about that in a minute, but the truth is about allyship is that we all need allies in our lives. We all benefit from allyship, from somebody standing up for us or standing with us. And what's interesting, I think, is that allyship, it's a noun, but it's an active noun. I once remember hearing Mr. Rogers talk about love as being an active noun. And it's true, love or struggle, think about those nouns that require action, or action is embedded in that idea. And it's the same thing with allyship. It's an active noun. And so I want to talk with you a minute about a poll now that we're going to launch in a moment. There are going to be 3 questions for you. So I'm going to give you a preview of the questions. The first is, can you think of a time in your life when you needed an ally? Now, you could think back to when you were a kid on the playground and maybe somebody was bullying you, and you really think, things would have been different if somebody had stood up for me. Or maybe you can think of a time when you were in a college classroom and somebody put your idea down and you wish somebody else had spoken up and said, well, actually, I agree with that. Maybe in your workplace or on a committee or in some situation, you had an idea, but you weren't given credit for it. And how wonderful it would have been if somebody had said, well, actually, that was Hilary's idea. Maybe she could speak about it. So think for a moment about a time when you needed an ally. Can you think of a time when you were an ally for someone else? Can you think of a time when you missed an opportunity to be an ally, or maybe you actually avoided the opportunity to be an ally? So you'll see in this poll in just a moment that these are the 3 questions, and we want to ask you to answer yes for each of them, no for each of them, or you're not sure. So if you could please launch the poll for us now, and you're going to have a minute. Your answers will be anonymous, but we really need to see your answers. So please click away. I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds. We should play Jeopardy music or something. All right, Richard, if you think we have a good number of responses, can you show us the results? If you think we need another few seconds, please let us know. Richard is our amazing IT person. Okay, wow. So hopefully you can see this, everyone. Looks like 95% of you say yes, you can think of a time in your life when you needed an ally. About 88% say you can think of a time when you were an ally. That's amazing. And 76% say you can think of a time when you missed or avoided an opportunity. And I see that, like 16% aren't sure. So you all can see these results. It's really amazing to see that so many of us can think of a time when we needed somebody to be an ally. And I'm so impressed that many of you can think of a time when you were an ally. So this idea of like, if we ever missed an opportunity or avoided an opportunity to be an ally, I know that's true for me. So I'm going to close the poll down and think about that concept for just a moment. What happens when we look the other way? When we avoid opportunities to be an ally? What happens if we don't confront bigotry or bias when we experience it? But before we delve into that, I have a different question for you. It's going to seem random for a moment, but hang with me. Here's my question. What do you know about a pyramid? So think about its shape, its construction. Those of you who are into math, think about it from a geometry standpoint. Those of you who are into architecture, think about it that way. What do you know about a pyramid? Think about the different layers. So one thing is that the bottom layer of a pyramid is the largest area. It's the broadest. It's at the bottom. And the top layer of a pyramid is always the smallest, right? And as far as the layers go, each successive layer depends upon the layer below it, right? It rests on the layer below it. And those layers must be there in order for the next layer to be supported. The reason I ask you to think about a pyramid is I'm going to show you a different image of a pyramid. It's called the Pyramid of Hate, and it was developed several years ago by the ADL, by the Anti-Defamation League. It's a really stark image, but it's very powerful. And I invite you to take a look at it. You'll see that there are, just like our other pyramid, there are different layers. The bottom layer is the broadest, and the smallest layer at the top. The biased attitudes that you see at the bottom of this pyramid include holding stereotypes, being afraid of people who are different from you, only surrounding yourself with ideas that reflect your own ideas. These biased attitudes are very, very common, and that's why they're in this largest layer at the bottom. If you go up a layer, you'll come to acts of bias. That would be like calling somebody names, bullying, ridiculing somebody, telling mean-spirited jokes, slurs. All of those kinds of acts of bias are in this blue layer. If you go up another layer, you come to the systems that are in society that demonstrate systemic discrimination. Those can be inequities in social justice, in housing, in employment, education, all the things that are built in to our society that are based on bias. That layer, that green layer, has to have the layers below it in place, okay? If you go up the pyramid, you actually come to violence based on hate. Violence that could be directed toward an individual, like assault or rape or murder. It could be violence toward a whole community, threats, desecration, vandalism, those kinds of things. And then ultimately, the top layer is genocide. That is the ultimate form of hate against an entire group of people. Now, when I've shared this pyramid, as I have many times with students in schools, they'll say like, well, if I tell a joke, you know, it's not a big deal. I'm not trying to support genocide. Is that what you're saying? That if I tell a joke, then I'm in favor of genocide? Absolutely not. That's not the intention of this visual. This visual is here to say genocide, that top layer, can never, ever, ever happen unless the lower levels of behaviors are firmly in place and if they're left unchallenged. So I want you to keep that in mind for a moment about the idea of challenging the behaviors in the lower levels, because what happens if you were to knock out the bricks in the bottom layers of a pyramid, right? If you got rid of these lower levels, what happens? The pyramid cannot exist, right? And so that's the power of awareness and the power of allyship. And we teach students, and I think about it myself, and I invite you to think about it too. If we challenge and push out those bricks one at a time, here and there, in the pyramid at the bottom layers, then the pyramid cannot stand. So here's another pyramid that I came across that was entitled White Supremacy, and I found it from the Equality Institute. You can see the layers are labeled differently. Genocide is still at the top, but at the bottom, the layers that they talk about are indifference, minimization, veiled racism. And so again, I would say if we challenge these layers, if we knock out the bricks, that pyramid cannot stand either. So here's another image that I want to share. Many of you are familiar with how the idea of an iceberg can be used to talk about different issues, where you think about an iceberg, the very top that's above the waterline is maybe only 10% of the iceberg, and the vast majority of the iceberg, more than this image even shows, is below the waterline. So when it comes to bias, it's the same thing. The little 10% that you see above the waterline is the bias that we might hear in the news. But underneath the waterline, the vast majority of incidents never make it to the news. These are the incidents that I'm talking about that we encounter in our lives, frequently. They never make it to the news, but we experience them. I want to pause for a moment and talk about these two I words, intent and impact. A lot of people talk about bias and they kind of focus on the intention of the person who might be the perpetrator of bias. So they'll say, well, I told that joke, I was just kidding around. I didn't intend to make a big deal. I was just joking around. Or maybe somebody says, oh my gosh, I had no idea what I just said was offensive. I'm really ignorant in that way. I apologize. I said that out of ignorance. Or maybe the comment is made or the behavior happens and the person knows darn well that it will be upsetting and they do it anyway, sort of malicious intent. So I think it really is important to know what somebody's intent is. Are they just joking around? Did they do something out of ignorance? Was it malicious? But you can't stay focused on the intent. You have to know that no matter what the intent, there's always an impact. So back to zero indifference. I know I'm jumping back, but this is where we each can make a difference, where we say to ourselves and we act in a way that others know we're going to try to be allies when we can. It's not something that you just do without thinking. There's some intention involved and some variables to consider. So for one thing, let's say you do overhear somebody saying something inappropriate or offensive. Where are you? Are you in a private space? Back in the olden days, are you in your office with someone? Or are you on a Zoom chat? Or, are you in a place that belongs to you? If you're a teacher, are you in your own classroom? Or are you in a public space? Did what you hear or see take place at a bus stop or at a soccer game or wherever? So thinking about where you are may impact what you decide to do. Who's involved? What's the power dynamic? Are you in a meeting and did your boss just say something that was, not sitting well with you? Is it an older person talking to a younger person? What's the power dynamic? When are you going to do something? Are you going to do it right now to interrupt what's happening, which has its absolute place and is appropriate? Or is it a situation where it would be better to take somebody aside later and say, look, this has been bothering me. I want to let you know what I saw or what I heard. And then how are you going to respond? If you are able to speak to the target and talk to them, I would say check in with them if you can. As I said, each situation is going to be different and give you the opportunity to think about these different variables. But if you are able to check in with the person who's been targeted, it could be after the fact. You could say, look, I didn't say anything in the moment, but I want to let you know. I heard what Tom said, and I'm willing to, do whatever you would like to help, address this problem. I'll go with you to the supervisor, to HR, or I will, talk with that person for you or with you. Oh, and so, are you going to talk to the offender? And would you do it in private or would you do it with witnesses? What's the best way to address all of this? If you're able to take the target's preference into account, that's really important. You may have an idea about what you would like to do, but checking in with them is key if you're able. So all of these variables happen in a nanosecond. You have to assess the situation and decide what you're going to do. But if you've thought about these a little bit ahead of time, you can be ready. You can assess in that nanosecond where you are, who's involved, should you say something now or later, all of these things. What if you are the target? What if you're not sure you can speak up? Maybe you have the voice that will allow you to do it, but what if you're not sure and you don't know what to do? If you're able to, seek an ally. seek an ally. And this works if you know that there are others around you who are familiar with this idea of zero indifference and who are embracing it. In a workplace, my goodness, it's so effective if from the CEO down, to the grassroots, everybody is aware of zero indifference. But it doesn't matter if you are a leader at a corporation or you're a leader in a volunteer situation. You don't have to be a leader in any sense to employ these ideas. A lot of times you think, well, I'm not a leader. I don't have any power. I don't have privilege in this situation. What am I going to do? I don't have the wherewithal, the value here to say something. Well, I disagree with you. And the reason I do is I want to bring up this notion of intersectionality. We talk about intersectionality a lot. It's the idea that each of us, no matter who we are, we have different aspects to our identity. We have our race, we have our religion, we have our gender identity, our education level, our socioeconomic status, our, whether we were born in this country, whether we weren't. There are all sorts of aspects to who we are that are at play at every moment, even though we're just one person. And so I know there are a lot of ways to talk about intersectionality, but in this, sense, I'm saying that no matter who you are, with all the intertwined aspects of who you are, there are times when you will need an ally, and there will be times that you can be an ally. So even the most, vaulted among us, think of anyone, even the biggest celebrity you can think of, or the most powerful person you might imagine. Guess what? There are times when they need an ally. And there are times when each and every one of us can be an ally for someone else. Okay, I want to be an ally. I've thought about this. I'm aware of the situations. I'm ready. But you know what? The truth is, I don't know what to say. I just stand there. I'm speechless most of the time. I'm caught unawares. I feel like a deer caught in headlights. What do I say? Well, there are a lot of things you can say. And I should pause for a second and say, that there are absolute times when you physically need to intervene. Someone's being accosted and you want to jump in and do something. And there are trainings for those kinds of ways to be upstanders. I'm thinking more about comments that are made or inappropriate remarks at a party, or at the water cooler, in the proverbial water cooler in the office. Like, what do you say? You're standing at the soccer game, your kids are playing, and a parent says something. It's really hard to know what to do. So I'm going to give you 3 very simple phrases that you can have in your back pocket. They won't solve world's problems. They won't be appropriate every time, but they might come in handy. So here's the first one. Maybe what you said just now, maybe you thought it was a compliment, but I have to tell you, it makes me really uncomfortable. Telling me that I must be really good at math because I'm part of a particular group of people. Or maybe you think, you say to me, oh, I never would have guessed you're Jewish. You don't look Jewish. Maybe you meant that as a compliment, but what you just said makes me feel uncomfortable. Or, I'm guessing, this joke you were telling, you didn't mean anything by it, but I want to be honest and tell you it doesn't feel right to me. This is a non-confrontational way to interrupt what somebody is saying and let them know that it's not sitting well with you. A second, so it assumes goodwill, I should say. You're not, accusing somebody of something. You're just saying, maybe, but. Here's another simple thing you could say. What do you mean? And here tone is really important. Like, it's not accusatory. What do you mean? It's sort of like perplexed, even though between you and me, you are not perplexed. You know exactly what they're saying, but you sort of take this perplexed approach. Like, what do you mean? No, I don't think that about everybody. What do you mean? And the third one I'm going to share today is really sounds super simple, but it's so effective. Ouch. Or I got to tell you, that was an ouch for me. It lets the other person know that the comment they're making, the observation they're sharing, the statement they're making is not one that you share. So maybe you meant this, but this is how I feel. What do you mean? Or, whoa, that was an ouch for me. These are three things you can just always have in your back pocket should the situation arise. So, okay, you're committed here. This idea of zero indifference makes sense to you. You want to work on this. I want to share with you some things that might be motivating you to be an ally. This information I came across from a gentleman named Keith Edwards. He's done a lot of research about what motivates people to be allies and how they can grow in that desire to be an ally. And he has a lot of information, and I'm just going to share a tiny bit with you. One of the things he talks about is three motivations for allyship: self-interest, altruism, and social justice. And I want to be clear that these three buckets or these three columns are not building on one another. One is not better than the other. It's not a linear progression. It's sort of fluid. In any situation, you might be acting out of altruism, you might be acting out of self-interest or with a social justice intent. But it's interesting to think about what's motivating me. So with self-interest, I'm paying attention to things that really matter to me. Maybe I'm paying attention to the targets who look like me or who are part of my affinity group. And I know just what they're feeling and what they're going through. With an altruistic motivation, I'm looking at others. I'm looking externally toward other groups that I want to help. And then for social justice, it's sort of a combination of the two. With self-interest, I'm being an ally to somebody kind of in my orbit. It's somebody that looks like me, that has a faith that's similar to me, and I know how I want to be an ally and stand up to the force that's coming toward them. So if I'm Jewish, maybe I'm paying attention to anti-Semitism. If I'm Asian American, I'm paying attention to all the hatred that's coming toward my group right now. With altruism, I'm thinking about another group that I don't belong to, that I want to partner with, that I want to support. And with social justice, I'm paying attention to larger issues. I want to address systemic racism or systemic issues that need to be dismantled. And with self-interest, I know who the perpetrators are. For example, I know they're white supremacists that need to be brought to account, or other groups. With altruism, maybe it's the dominant social group that needs to be called to account. And with social justice, it's the whole system that needs to be addressed because it's the problem. With self-interest, I'm thinking I have some power here. I feel protective over people that I connect with, a group that I belong to. With altruism, I want to empower the other group. I feel like I can give aid. I want to help them. And with social justice, I want to build toward a better system altogether. So you can see how they overlap. They're not hard delineations, but it's interesting to think what's motivating me in a given situation. There are some pitfalls. These are not, givens, but maybe I'm so focused on helping folks that are like me, I don't realize that at the same time, I'm still rather sexist, or I'm classist. I have blinders on maybe because I'm only looking at this one issue. Maybe if I'm being an ally for others in an altruistic way, I don't realize that I'm stepping on other people's toes. I'm so anxious to be helpful that I get defensive if somebody points out that I've misspoken, so I just need to be aware of these things. And with the social justice, focus, I need to be aware that I need to seek out critiques from others and admit mistakes if I don't know what I'm doing. It shouldn't keep me from standing up. I just need to be aware of these things. So I think if you want to be an effective ally, right, you're thinking about what's motivating you and all that, fabulous. But you really have to make space for listening to what another person or another group needs, because what you think somebody else needs may not be what they want. What you think you want to give may not be what's needed, which is a hard one to swallow sometimes, right? But the way to think about it is that allyship is not about you. And the only way to find out what someone else needs from you is to talk to them and to listen, if at all possible. Talk to them and listen. So that's why I want to kind of pivot and talk about conversations, because conversations are a key factor, a key element of the relationships that you want to build in order to be an effective ally. So research shows that there are different ways to listen. You can be listening to respond, or you can be listening to understand. You can be listening to think, what am I going to say next? Or you can be listening to really take in what the other person is sharing with you. That's the kind of listening we want to do. And when you're talking with someone, you want to avoid conversational narcissism. Well, what is that? Conversational narcissism is when you inadvertently, subliminally, kind of turn the conversation back to you. So someone's sharing an experience they're having, that's really causing them to be unsettled or unhappy or worried. And they share, oh, this is what's happening to me and this is how I'm feeling. And you jump in and say, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're feeling. That happened to me. As this is what happened to me, and this is how I felt, and this is what I did. And what you've done is you've moved the conversation away from that person to yourself. It's coming from a place of, wanting to show empathy, right? Like, this happened to me too. I know but you can show empathy without turning the conversation to yourself. I have to admit, I'm very guilty of this. I catch myself doing it all the time in conversations. Oh, I know, oh, you're going to buy a car. I'm buying a car. Let me tell you, it's really easy to do. So what can you do to show empathy and not fall into the trap of being a conversational narcissist? Well, you can say, oh, that something similar has happened to me, but tell me more about your situation. I know how you feel. I've had something similar, but I'd like to know more about what's happening with you. Can you tell me some more specifics? So that's how you can turn the conversation back to them, and they know that you are exhibiting empathy. The whole idea about wanting to support people around you, wanting to support your colleagues, wanting to support your friends, your community friends, your family members, is by being able to know their narratives and being able to listen to their stories. Facts alone really don't influence us. right? Narratives and lived experiences really impact us. So we have to make time and make room to share those narratives and to be able to hear those lived experiences from others. We have to seize opportunities by being brave and initiating conversations that we might not always do. You know, Brene Brown talks a lot about being brave, and she says when people are vulnerable and they open themselves up, they think that being vulnerable is a sign of weakness. But when we hear someone else sharing a personal story or being vulnerable, we think, oh my gosh, they're so brave. I wish I could do that. So be brave. Initiate conversations with other people about something deeper than, superfluous things. So how can you promote these conversations? How can you encourage dialogue? You have to invest in these relationships. And I'm thinking for the moment, like in a corporate setting, you have to really encourage meaningful conversations. How are you going to do that? Everybody's so busy and time is of the essence for everything. Well, you have to build in time at meetings, for example. And this could be at work or in a volunteer setting. You have to, get to the business, right? You have projects you have to work on, but build in time in your agenda for conversations. It could be 10 minutes at the beginning. It could be 10 minutes at the end of your meeting. But if it's always part of the agenda, then people know my team leader, my chair of this committee, whatever, they value conversations so much that they're making it an expected part of our gathering. And we make time for it. And we talk not about the project, not about the upcoming event that we're planning, but actually in this 10 minutes, we talk about something personal, like maybe an experience that we've had or a value that is meaningful to us or whatever. But building those conversations into an expected sort of framework means that people will get to know each other better. Maybe you pair people together intentionally, or maybe it's just random. Turn to the person sitting to your left and share this thing. You'll figure it out, but I encourage you to make it an investment. And you can do this in your life, right? At dinner, when you're going on an outing, at family reunions, or when you make a new connection with someone. Invest in the time to have conversations. And for allyship, how do you invest in allyship? At work or in your community interactions, support this idea of zero indifference. Believe in its power. If you know other people around you are embracing zero indifference, then it gives you a sense of confidence and a sense of belonging. Amplify voices around you that aren't usually heard, or maybe they're not heard first. Like somebody, says, well, actually that was Carl's idea. Maybe he can talk about it a little bit more. Or I really thank you for giving me credit for that event, but it was really Susanna who organized everything. And I think she should get the credit. So lift up people around you. That's how you promote allyship. So we've talked about a lot of things. Think for a minute, what's resonated for you today? Is it the idea of zero indifference? Was it the pyramid of hate and how we can knock out the bricks at the bottom? Was the idea of these different motivations for allyship, self-interest, altruism, social justice, speaking to you? What about the idea of avoiding conversational narcissism? How about intentionally including conversation time in your meetings? Like, what's resonating for you? Again, allyship is an active noun. It's active. So I'm wondering, what will you commit to doing? What are some small things you think you can commit to? So we're going to show you another poll. Here's another chance for you to participate actively. There are going to be 6 possibilities for you to choose from. You can choose up to 4, okay? Up to 4 of the 6 things that you might be willing to commit to. And so I'm going to ask Richard to launch the poll again. We'll have again another minute. Your answers are anonymous. What will you focus on in the coming weeks? Think about it. Will you create safe opportunities for someone to come have a conversation with you? Will you practice avoiding conversational narcissism? What about zero indifference? You won't look the other way. Will you pay attention to your own power and privilege in given situations and think about what you can do to step up? What about educating yourself so that other people don't have to educate you? Maybe you're not sure you can do any of these things. So I invite you now to choose. You've got about 30 seconds. Okay, another minute or second or two. All right, Richard, if you think we've got a good number of respondents, please go ahead and share the results. All right, so let's see, we have some spread out possibilities. Almost all of these actually have over 50% saying they could try them. I think the most is practicing avoiding conversational narcissism. I'm with you on that one. Educating yourself, creating safe opportunities, that's awesome. And paying attention to power and privilege. These are great. And I see, okay, I can see if you're not sure you can do any of these, I hope you'll think about it. I hope you will think about it. And maybe as you digest these ideas, they will become real to you. Because your personal commitment is the only thing that you can control when it comes to allyship. So I hope that you will strive to be known as someone who's respectful of everyone and respectful to everyone. Pay attention to your power and privilege in various situations. Be an ally by listening to what's needed from you and really invest in conversations. It takes time. It takes time and diligence. Avoid being a conversational narcissist. Know that I will be practicing that with you. Don't ignore bad stuff. If it's too risky to speak up, find an ally. Find an ally. They're around. And implement zero indifference. Hold yourself and those around you accountable. Because sometimes you need an ally. Sometimes you can be an ally. But here's the thing. You don't get to say, I am an ally. You have to be called an ally by others. I want to say that again. You don't get to say, I am an ally. You have to be called an ally by others. So thank you. Oops, I just got out of that by accident. Let's see if I can pull that. I want to say thank you to everyone. If you're interested in reaching out to me for some reason, if you have a suggestion that you want to share or an idea, you can reach me at this email. But regardless, thank you so much for being part of this today.
Thank you so much, Hilary, for this really powerful and practical presentation. There was a question that came up. We just have a couple minutes, but I'm hoping maybe in our last couple minutes, you'll touch on it, which you did in the presentation, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit. And the question is, what are your suggestions for how an organization might go about creating a culture that encourages people to be allies and demonstrate allyship?
It's a great question. So an organization whether that's a business or a volunteer organization. It's made up of people. And so I think it takes time to introduce this idea of allyship. It takes conversation. So developing a series of questions to get people starting to talk about it, sharing some concepts like zero indifference, and inviting people to participate, helping them to see what are the benefits to being allies for each other. What are some things that we'd like to change about the culture of our organization without accusing people, but really with a spirit of lifting up and improving the situation. That would be inspiring people. That would be my advice. And I know that sounds kind of Pollyanna-ish, but Pollyannaism, if that's a word, has its place. And it really can be the instigator. It can be the thing that gets people started. And then you can delve into some really meaningful conversations that will lead to such impactful change.
Thank you, Hilary. I want to end on one great comment that we got here from Elena, who writes, if everyone here goes forth and makes these attempts in their lives, maybe we will move the needle a little. And I think that is so true. And even we saw in this brief poll, how many people feel like they could do something. And even that will make a change.
We're changing history every day, every moment, every choice that we make in the next minute becomes history. And if we want to look back on the things that we've done in our lives, the choices that we've made, if we want to think about good choices, we have the opportunity to do that every day.
Thank you so much, Hilary. And thank you to everybody for joining today's program. The program was recorded, so you can find it on our website starting tomorrow, along with all of our other past Lunch and Learn programs. For over 30 years, the Holocaust Center has offered an annual writing, art, and film contest. And this year we received almost 600 entries from more than 55 schools in the region. A panel of judges had the very difficult task of selecting winners, and we hope you will join us next week at the same time to meet the winners and to see some of the winning entries. We have a very special program planned, and we hope to have as many people as possible to show up to support and celebrate this next generation. So please join us June 8th, next week, Tuesday at noon. And I want to give a special thank you to Richard Green, our museum and technology director, who's running the technical side of the show, including the polls that you just saw. Also, a huge thank you to our executive director, Dee Simon, and our entire team, Lori Worshall-Cohen, Nicole Bella, Julia Thompson, Paul Regelbrug, Ellie Selesky, Amanda Davis, Rick Brewer, Katie Lawrence, Morgan Romero, and Craig Verniste, all of whom help to make these programs possible and to help run the Holocaust Center as the strong organization that it is. Special thank you again to Verizon for supporting the first in the series of programs and the next 3 that are coming up later this month. Thanks again, everybody. This concludes our program, and we look forward to seeing you next week.